I wanted to walk you through completing your individual behavior project. So I have given you all your scenario, your behavior scenario student, and now I want to walk you through what your behavior plan format is going to look like and what I want you to think about as you complete it. So you are going to kind of type right in the form. There's not a narrative or anything that you're going to add to it. You're just going to fill in the boxes, answer the questions, all related to the scenario that you were assigned. Thinking about everything that we have talked about this semester, everything that you've read in your book, we've kind of talked about your behavior plan classroom-wide and the interventions, the strategies that you're going to implement classroom-wide, so your universals, everything that you're going to do that's going to apply to all students. So when that doesn't work, when you have a student that you have done all those best practices for at the universal level, when that does not work and you have a student that needs something more, this is where you're going to turn to something that is specific just to that student. We've talked about looking at those functions of behavior, where we looked at, is it to escape something? Is it to gain something, right? So this is where that's going to play in. So when you're first looking at the form, you're going to look up here at the context. So the context is, where is it taking place? Are we looking at a playground behavior? Are we looking at a classroom behavior? So give us a context of where that behavior is taking place. This here is called the competing behavior pathway. And so we're first going to just kind of address this going across the middle. And we're just going to identify the pieces of the behavior that we know. So there may or may not be a setting event. So setting event, this is going to be something that is not directly related to the behavior, but may impact the likelihood that that behavior is going to occur. So this may be if the student is tired, it's more likely that this behavior is going to occur. If the student has spent time with the non-custodial parent, this behavior is more likely to occur. If the student has changes in routine, this behavior is more likely to occur. So if you know one, or if there's a setting event related to that behavior, you're going to identify it here. If there is not, I want you to put none or NA or something, so I know that you've at least considered it. All right? Triggering antecedent, whatever has happened immediately before the behavior that has triggered that behavior to happen. This can be a request to perform a task. This can be an interaction with a peer. Whatever it is that has triggered that behavior to happen, you're going to fill that in there. The behavior itself, I want it in observable, measurable terms. So saying that the student was rude, that doesn't really tell me anything. Saying that the student was disrespectful, that doesn't tell me anything. The student threw a fit, screaming, yelling, throwing things. That's a little bit more descriptive. I want to know exactly what the behavior was. The maintaining consequence. The consequence is whatever happened immediately after the behavior. So if the triggering antecedent was, I requested the student to get their math book out to do math, and the behavior was they threw the math book at me, the maintaining consequence is, well, because they threw the math book at me, I sent them to timeout. Well, if the reason that they did that is because they don't like to do math, and I sent them to timeout, well, they got out of doing math. So if that's what I do every single time, well, that's going to maintain them doing that behavior, right? Because they're getting what they want. So if my consequence is them going to timeout, well, they're going to do that every single time because it's working for them. It's getting them what they want, which is getting out of math. Now remember, consequence doesn't always mean punishment. It's just whatever happens immediately after that behavior. So in the same scenario, if he threw his math book and the consequence was everybody laughed because of his actions, he was getting peer attention, he liked that, that's still maintaining that behavior. So it's just whatever happened immediately after the behavior that's going to keep making that behavior happen, right? So I want you to identify what that consequence is. Remember, not always thinking punishment, just kind of whatever the reaction was to that behavior. And then identifying the function. Was it to escape something? Okay, escaping math, escaping having to do that. Or was it to obtain something, right? So he was obtaining pure attention. Everybody was laughing at him. What was that function of that behavior? Now, looking down here at alternative behavior. Sometimes we know what we ultimately want him to do. Instead of throwing the math book at me, I want him to sit down and do his math and be okay with it. For some students, going from throwing the math book at me to ultimately sitting down doing their math and not having a problem with it is a pretty far stretch. So we might need an alternative okay with that. I would be okay with him sitting at his desk, pushing the math book aside and sitting quietly, as opposed to throwing a math book at me. I would be okay with that for now until we work towards opening his math book and getting busy and doing his math. That will be up to you. If you feel like you need like a stepping stone behavior, that's okay until you're able to get to the desired behavior. That will be up to you. This alternative behavior needs to serve the same function as the problem behavior. So throwing the book at me is escaping having to do the math. Pushing his book aside would be an acceptable alternative behavior that's still serving the same function. He's not having to do it, but he's not throwing it at me. It serves the same function. It's acceptable. I can live with him just not doing it better than I can him throwing something at me. Okay? Ultimately, we want him to open his book and do the work. And it's maintaining consequence. So thinking about maintaining consequence, you're thinking about ultimately. Now, during the process of getting them there, you might be teaching them with tangible rewards, stickers, things like that. But ultimately, how are you going to get him to continue with that desired behavior? Ultimately, he's going to get praise from you. He's going to get good grades. He's going to meet his goals. Ultimately, that's the maintaining consequence, right? That's ultimately what's going to keep him doing that work. During the teaching phase, you might be giving him stickers. You might be giving him tangible rewards, things, token economy type things. That's fine. You're gonna map that out in your teaching strategies. But here, I want to know ultimately what's going to make him do that forever and ever and ever. Is it going to be stickers forever and ever and ever? Probably not. What is going to make him do this desired behavior forever and ever and ever? That's what needs to be there. Okay, so this is really important because this is what's going to map out the rest of your plan. Then your summary statement is literally just pulling from these boxes and filling this in. So during, what was your context? During math class. You're going to fill that in here. When this happened, the antecedent, the student is likely to engage in throwing the math book because I sent them to timeout. Therefore, the function of the behavior is to avoid math. This is more likely to occur when he skips breakfast, if you identified a setting event. If you did not, then you just take that statement out, that bottom statement, because we don't know if there's a setting event. That's your summary statement. So now you start writing your intervention plan. You have it all mapped out. So the summary statement, you're just literally copying this and putting it down here. This is the beginning of your plan. If you had a setting event identified, you're going to start identifying strategies to support that. Many times the setting event is happening outside of school. We can't say, Mom, I want you to do this. We can't really ask Mom to do certain things at home. We can't monitor that. We can't put those tasks out there and expect other people to implement them for us. However, we can teach students things in the school that give them strategies to do at home. So if maybe a setting event is that they didn't get their homework done. So they come to school, they know they don't have their homework done. They know they're going to, have consequences for that. So that just kind of sets off their day. So we can teach them things at school about being more organized, how to be more successful in getting those things done at home. So think about, is there anything that you can do at school, things that we can put in place for them to make them be more successful at home, that can curtail some of those setting event strategies. If they're coming to school late because they're getting up late, okay, can we teach them management skills, time management skills, so that they can manage themselves at home so they can rectify that coming to school? So think about those setting event strategies. If you didn't identify a setting event, then just put no setting event or no setting event identified, whatever. Antecedent strategies. So whatever that antecedent was that you identified, you need to identify some strategies to eliminate that. So if me requesting him to start math, get out your math book, it's time for math, if that was his antecedent, I need to come up with some strategies that make that less likely that's going to set him off. So what are some strategies that I can put in place? I'm going to give him some warnings in advance that math is going to be coming up. I'm going to give him some choices of how he's going to do his math. So anyway, some strategies for reducing the likelihood that antecedent is going to set him off. Justification for that desired behavior. So my desired behavior is that he's going to sit nicely, open up his book, and get started. So you need to make sure that whatever that desired behavior you have selected for that student is appropriate. It's appropriate for the student, and it's not just about you as the teacher. Is it appropriate for that student in that environment? And so you're just kind of justifying that, why that behavior is your identified desired behavior. How are you going to get that student to that desired behavior? So here's where you're going to map out how you're going to get them there. How are you going to get them from throwing the math book at you to sitting nicely at the desk, opening the book, and getting to work? How are you going to get them there? We're going to go from this step to this step. We're going to use a token economy system. We're going to have them work for 5 minutes and they can take a break. So what strategies are you going to implement to get them there? So this section might be pretty lengthy as compared to some of the other sections, but you're just going to map out your plan. And then here is that consequence area that you identified. So here you might map out, well, initially we're going to start with stickers until he has mastered it, and then we'll move to more natural consequences like praise, specific positive feedback, good grades, things like that. So it might be a progression of consequence and reinforcement. And then you will identify if at some point that inappropriate behavior resurfaces, particularly along the lines of when we're teaching, right? Because we're teaching it, we might have a lapse here and there. So if that inappropriate behavior resurfaces, how are we going to handle it? So if we've identified that me sending him to timeout is just reinforcing him because he's getting what he needs, he's escaping that math, which is what he really wants. So I've identified that. I'm not going to keep doing that. What else am I going to do? How else can I respond so we're not reinforcing the behavior? You're going to map that out here. If it is, so here it talks about a safety plan. If the behavior is explosive in any way or violent in any way, you need to have a safety plan on how you will clear the classroom of your other students, because that needs to be identified in advance. A signal to the other students that if I say this word, you just need to get up and walk out of the classroom and go to Mrs. Jones next door. And that needs to be done for any time you have a student with explosive behavior. Just a nice, calm plan that's practiced in advance. And that's it.